Welcome to a Tech Moment on Cannabis Tech. I'm your host, Christina Etter. In this podcast, we take a few minutes to talk about some of the exciting science and technology that's impacting and changing the cannabis and hemp industries. And one of the things that we talk about a lot lately this year is the supply chain and all of the issues that all industries really are experiencing. Since the start of the pandemic, issues surrounding supply chain inadequacies has plagued the United States and has increasingly gotten worse with time. Add in the impact of the Chinese Lunar New Year and now the Russian war on Ukraine, experts are anticipating yet another blow to an already fragile system. I have invited Alen Nguyen, the CEO and co-founder of MainStem, an integrated purchasing platform designed for cannabis business. He's going to share his insights about how the cannabis industry is going to be impacted by today's supply chain crisis. Thanks so much for your time today, and welcome to the show, Alen.
Thanks, Christina. Thanks for having me on.
Now, before we really jump into this topic of the supply chain, I would love for you to just briefly tell our audience a little bit about yourself, your background, and kind of what led you to MainStem and what you do today.
Sure. I'm a engineer by degree. Once I got out of that, I realized I did not want to be an engineer at all. I went to the real world. I decided to go back, get my MBA, and moved to the dark side of business, and I really enjoyed that. I was working in aerospace at the time, and I just always had this itch, and I knew that I wanted to start something. I tried starting a company in the aerospace industry, but at the time I was very young. I didn't have adequate resources to the amount of capital that was needed to start something in a mature industry like aerospace. My cousin, who is my business partner and co-founder, he came to me one day. It was November of 2014, I believe, or 13 now. Yeah, it was 13. And he says to me, because we're family, we see each other during holidays, it was Thanksgiving. He says, "Hey, I'm a grower in the cannabis space and things are legalizing here in Washington. I want to be a grower and I want you to do this with me. You should take a look at this." And he plops down like 40 pages of regulations and requirements from the Washington State Liquor Control Board. I quickly read it as we're eating turkey and, the tryptophan is kicking in and I'm getting tired and I'm looking at this and I said, "There's no way you're going to be able to do this. This is going to take too much money and there's so many regulations. Oh, and by the way, it's due in a month. Probably not going to happen." So then, as families do, we have fun, we enjoy our time together, and then I see him again during Christmas, so a month later. And now we're talking 5 days before Washington kicks off their commercial legalization of cannabis. He comes to me again, he says, "You really should take a look at this. You really should look at the industry. It's booming, it's going to be huge." And I said, "Okay." And just keep in mind, cannabis at the time for me was something of the past. High school consumption, had fun and everything, went to college, got married, went to aerospace where they randomly drug test you. So it was a thing of the past for me. So I had really not been keeping up with the industry at all. And I said, "Okay, fine. Entertain me. Let's go through this and see what you're talking about." And he literally walked me through his garden from all of the points where he germinated a seed to where he bought his supplies, how he bought his supplies, what went into growing cannabis, how they packaged it, how they dried it, how they trimmed it, which he still has nightmares about, and how they ended up selling it to the dispensary. I was quite enamored, by the way, with the entire process. And so going through that entire process with him, I said, "I don't know anything about plants. I couldn't grow anything if my life depended on it." In fact, my father had an ivy that he had since I was born. And when I bought my first house when I was 28 years old, he gave me the ivy that he had for 28 years, and it died. And I killed it because I couldn't know how to take care of it. So I told my cousin, I said, "I have no interest in doing anything on the plant side because I just not my expertise. I am a B2B guy. I know infrastructure really well. I think I can focus on this area." And we pinpointed supply chain. And that is the napkin note of the company, was to fix supply chain in the industry. Because we saw as things scaled up, the way it was today was not going to support the larger industry. And so that's our napkin note from back in 2014.
What a phenomenal story. I love how he was so persistent and getting your attention and bringing you into the industry, and I love how you referred to the business side of things being the dark side, because I often joke about people coming to the cannabis industry and joining the dark side. So it's a lot of fun, and I love the stories that talk about how people get here, because everybody gets here kind of a different way, but it's always fun to hear. Now, I'm sure in your role that these supply chain issues that we've been seeing across pretty much all industries have been a big part of your day to day. So, can you give our audience kind of an idea of, from your perspective, what's kind of the main drivers right now that are impacting the supply chain? And is it still the lack of drivers? Are we still being impacted by the pandemic? I mean, what all is really kind of impacting the supply chain issues that we're seeing?
Would you like me to speak on a macro level, at a global supply chain, or in cannabis, or both?
I think they kind of all relate, but we can kind of go at this. Tell us what you're seeing at a global perspective, and then kind of whittle it down to how that's kind of impacting the cannabis space.
Sure. So, on a global scale, the biggest things that impacted it were the pandemic, right? The normal ebbs and flows of seasons and of manufacturing and of supply chain, those things have pretty much evened out for most industries, right? Like big CPG, the Walmarts of the world, the Targets, they have an established supply chain that they know how to manage across their manufacturers overseas, and they know how to deal with those things that come along. The pandemic really introduced the monkey wrench into the entire situation, because first of all, everything shut down, right, on the manufacturing side. Majority of goods are manufactured overseas, but predominantly in China, and the manufacturing shut down there. So the supply side of the equation immediately shut down. And so the other side of supply chain is demand, right? Supply and demand. Once we shut down domestically, that shut down the demand. Oh, actually, sorry, it spiked the demand side initially because everybody's running to get toilet paper and tissues, right? You remember that? And so that put a big spike on there, which freaked everyone out in that supply chain. Well, then it immediately dropped off quickly. That demand side did. So these larger companies that are in these other industries were just trying to figure out what the real demand was. Everyone wants toilet paper today, nobody wants it tomorrow, right? Oh, now we have another scare, everyone wants toilet paper again. So it's very hard to figure out on the demand side of that is, what do we actually need to build into our supply chain? And then on the other side, where the supply side is we have factories shut down. So just the ripple effect of not knowing that equilibrium where they balance out was a major problem. Then we saw logistically, as things started ramping back up, we got manufacturing, a lot of manufacturing done overseas. The demand is starting to build up, but now you've got the logistics of how you get the product over to the customers. Here we're talking about the U.S. How do you get all those products over to you, right? There's a very tight bandwidth of logistics, of cargo ships and everything. Well, now we've got all of this pent-up demand being manufactured. That gets put on these ships, but the ports now can't handle the amount of throughput. So that's why you've got 150 ships staying outside of Long Beach waiting to be processed, right? So the ripple effect on there on a global scale was pretty impactful. Now let's take it a layer back and really look at what happened on the cannabis side. So cannabis, while a very fast, rapidly growing industry, is still very small compared to CPG, right? Healthcare, everything else. And so we take a lower priority on those logistics, the shipping containers. We take lower priority on the manufacturing side. We take lower priority on the processing. So with that jam already in there, we're in lower priority, it takes us even longer. We also have this insane complexity around, we are a rapidly growing industry. Our demand is growing significantly every month, every quarter. Consumers are 25% of cannabis consumers consume more during times of concern, like the pandemic. So we have additional consumption on the existing market and that growing market. So the demand side is just skyrocketing. And the manufacturers overseas are working really hard to try and meet this demand, and they're just not there yet. And so that's really in a nutshell from a macro and micro level of what we're seeing.
Talk just a little bit about the kinds of products that we're seeing uh, companies struggle to get. I mean, what kinds of things right now are really being held up with the supply chain?
Right. And I think it's important to note that the bulk majority of the supply chain that we're experiencing issues with or delays with are goods that are manufactured overseas. Just for the sheer nature of the lead time and the logistics to get them here, that's predominantly where most of the issues are. Things that are manufactured here domestically, we have less of those issues because it may be a little bit longer to manufacture and distribute the goods, but you're not dealing with those logistical issues of shipping containers sitting outside of the port. So most of cannabis products that are made for cultivation, right? So the nutrient side, right? A lot of the things that go into growing cannabis are actually done here domestically, right? The illicit and medical market has been around for 30 plus years that has a foundation that's been supporting it. So a lot of nutrient companies on the West Coast have been bred here. A lot of the things that are either electronics like lighting controllers, those things that have always been manufactured overseas, those have impact. The biggest things that we're seeing are things that have been newly introduced to the cannabis industry due to regulation. So now we're talking about packaging, right? Instead of buying it in a Ziploc bag that we bought from our friends, we are now buying them in branded child resistant packaging. A lot of that stuff is manufactured overseas. We're also seeing different ways of consumption, right? So vape cartridges, we're seeing pre-rolled cones. A lot of those are relatively newly introduced to the larger commercial side and also manufactured overseas. So those are predominantly the big ones. There's methods of consumption, so the different ways pre-rolls, concentrates, and vape cartridges, and then also all of the packaging associated with it has been impacted the most.
Interesting. So yeah, it really is kind of the perfect storm of cannabis weathered the pandemic in terms of being deemed essential, but the increased consumption now on top of the supply chain issues is just causing such a bottleneck in getting all those products. So that's fascinating to see how that ripple effect really kind of works. But now here we go into 2022. We're seeing all of this happen. We've just come through the Chinese Lunar New Year, which you and I've talked about in before, which impacts supply chains all across the world. But talk to us a little bit about why it is so much more impactful for the cannabis industry than traditional CPGs to mitigate these problems.
Right. So the larger companies have gone, they've weathered the storm of CPG world forever, right? And even healthcare and industrial as well. They know that every year you need to plan for Lunar New Year. And so they've got a great opportunity and legacy of having this year over year experience to where they can properly plan. The challenge with the cannabis industry is that it's growing so fast, right? That these operators that are opening up new locations or they're buying other companies, they have a challenge of understanding what their real demand is and the visibility, right? Like they have three different bank accounts, three different accounting software, maybe two different inventory systems. So to be able to pull up and say, aha, I know that I need to purchase 6 million vape cartridges in the next 3 months is a challenge for them. And if you can't have the transparency and the ability to plan for that, you could never properly plan for something like Lunar New Year. Lunar New Year is only like a 3 or 4 week actual period, but the repercussions of it and the planning period is like 6 months. You've got to get your order in the queue months before Lunar New Year. If you don't, you're not receiving your product for months and months after Lunar New Year. So it's only 3 or 4 weeks of real impact that a lot of these manufacturers shut down, but the ripple effect of the workforce going home and some of them coming back and having to ramp up production, that's like 6 months. So if you don't have the ability to have the foresight of understanding what I need as a company and then be able to get it into the queue early enough, you put yourself behind by at least 6 months.
Wow, that is an incredible impact. Now, we're actually kind of getting this now sucker punch kind of is what I want to refer to it as, with this Russian invasion on Ukraine. And I can only imagine that this is going to continue to exacerbate the supply chain problems that we've had up till now. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you anticipate this to also impact the cannabis industry?
Yeah, it's very interesting, right? It's clearly, well, first of all, before I go into that piece of it, I think it's absolutely terrible what's going on, and for a number of reasons, and it's very impactful for people's lives as a whole. And I don't want to discount that at all. I think it's very important that we address those things and really understand what the larger impact of that is. Now, with regards to supply chain, it's it's a little bit of concern, I think, that's looming in people's minds of what is going to happen with this invasion, right? Does this mean that we are going to enter into something larger? Do I need to protect myself? Do I need to reserve my capital as an organization, as a company? Do I need to be more cautious? And so when you do that, you buy it more pessimistically, right? You are buying like there is potentially only 30 days of inventory or whatever it may be. So you're reducing your optimism around your supply chain, which can have massive ripples, because if you're placing small orders every 15 days, every 30 days to reserve capital, instead of providing a well planned out, here's my 3, 6, 9 month to Mr. Manufacturer, here's a purchase order for that, that's going to cause a lot of issues for planning. I tried thinking long and hard about this, of what it would have impact on the supply side. There's not a lot of cannabis products that come out of Russia, but as oil being one of Russia's predominant exports, a lot of plastics are oil based. That could have an impact on commodities. I think and a lot of packaging that the cannabis industry uses is plastic based packaging. Still very early, still very on it, but I literally had about, 2 weeks to really think about this, or a week to think about this, and to try and understand what kind of ripples that we would potentially see on the supply side. The demand side is going to be very clear. It's going to be trepidatious, like cautious more forward movement in terms of how they manage their supply chain.
Interesting. I would think we would probably also see a rise in cost, just from the simple fact that the rise in the price of fuels is going to increase the amount, that it takes to deliver those products. And so I can imagine that delivery costs and things like that, we're going to see those things rise as well. And you're right, it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible what we're seeing happening all across the world, and it's a horrible thing. And hopefully we can get through this quickly and with as little damage as possible. But we definitely, our prayers are over there with the Ukrainians and what they're going through right now, because it's just horrible.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I will piggyback on the freight piece. You're right. I was listening to a couple of earnings calls from some publicly traded companies that are around logistics to really understand what the impact would be. So you've got this bottleneck of logistics that are coming overseas, right? And this bottleneck has had pent up demand. Well, that also increases the price of freight just by supply and demand, right? Then we're also hearing on the logistics side that overall freight domestically is increasing, right? Along with inflation of cost of goods. As part of that cost of goods, freight is going up. If freight goes up, the price of the product goes up overall. So we are seeing that impact not just on the product side, but on the logistics.
So we don't want to end any podcast by any means on such gloom and doom kind of topics that we're talking about. So let's get to the solutions. Obviously, like I said, everybody is feeling the impact of these supply chain issues, and some companies are able to navigate these disruptions a little bit better than others. So can you talk to us a little bit about what businesses can do differently to kind of stay on top of some of these supply chain issues?
Yeah, I was thinking of this question through a couple of times when I got asked this before, and my son comes to me about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago now. He's 11 years old and he's in gymnastics, and he comes home one day and he goes, "Daddy, proper planning prevents poor performance." And I said to him, "That's it. That's exactly it. That's essentially what MainStem does up front. Is with our platform is we help these operators, the cannabis operators, really understand the transparency and the demand that they have through our platform. We sit on top of all that aggregation of the different bank accounts, the different systems, the different processes, and we put everything into our dashboard so you have transparency. At that point, you can really start your planning. You can really understand, hey, I need X amount of this, X amount of that. And we will also make suggestions and say you should start planning around that. Once you have that part, that's the most important part. The second part is great. Let's take action. And MainStem plugs in an ecosystem of suppliers for your products. So now once you have the planning completed, you can actually work to see the different layers of distribution or even get in the manufacturing queue and really start tying in your planning with the actual supply base.
One of the things that just came to mind while I was listening to you talk is that we often hear that the cannabis industry is great at cannabis in many instances, but when it comes to dealing with the day-to-day business and dealing with the issues that come up with that sometimes those companies or those professionals aren't necessarily up to par. But as you're talking about this, it just sounds like there are so many technological solutions out there that can really help businesses embrace these kinds of things and kind of teach them or lead them down this path to improve their business processes. Would you say that that's kind of what your intention is here with MainStem, is to provide these business owners kind of a shortcut to doing these kinds of things?
Yes, absolutely. So we see the industry from back when we started in 2014, right? Two guys with a napkin note of trying to solve supply chain. It has drastically evolved as the industry has grown and gotten more complex. I would say probably in the last 2 years, that's when really the industry started appreciating and understanding technology as a solution for operations. So when we worked to design our platform, we knew a couple of things, right? Technology is not necessarily something that is used in day-to-day farm, right? But something like Amazon is. And so we decided to build a technology platform that has all of the sophisticated business things that you need to operate it, but make it as simple as something that everyone is very used to, right? B2C commerce online. So to build in all these powerful tools and put it into a package to where it's very easy to someone that is very familiar with Amazon or any other e-commerce site out there, put that into a package. We felt that was the best way to help the maturity movement of our customers in terms of they know that they're here, they want to get to the next level. How can we help them do that and make it as simple as possible? And the industry is perfect for right now. Right now, that timing is spot on because now folks are really appreciating technology to grow their organization and for the maturity movement.
Right, right. And I spent 20 years in corporate IT before I started working for the cannabis industry, and so I'm a big proponent for systems. I just feel like systems really kind of help make your day-to-day work go so much smoother. And so as I see how technology really is evolving and changing the cannabis industry, it's systems like these that really help make that process easier, I think, for businesses and entrepreneurs to really get ahead of all of the regulations and everything that needs to be done for the cannabis industry. These systems are just critical.
Yeah, one of the things I think is really neat is that when you look at the Canatech companies that are out there, we're solving not only for specific problems, but we're solving for the maturity of the industry in each stage. I think that is extremely unique because when we look at cannabis technology, right? We look at it as a whole. We're starting from zero. We're starting from a foundation of greenfield. And so for us to be able to take the tried and true things that come with supply chain or whatever cannabis technology that you're building for, and to be able to insert now all of these new pieces like data, like consumer insights into a tried and true thing like supply chain, you have the opportunity to form and build supply chain the way it's supposed to be, right? Our mantra is to redefine supply chain. And to be able to do that in an industry is very neat because we can have a lasting impact on how things are done in the future. And then the second part of that is while you're doing that, which is already very challenging, we are helping the industry mature, which means that you can't create a software like other industries and go to healthcare and say, you need this, because healthcare is already very mature, right? Most companies in that industry are at a point to where you can introduce a technology that's ready for that industry, or ready for the maturity point of that industry. We have to not only build things the way it could be and the way it should be in a greenfield, we have to build them to help grow with our customers from when they're very beginning in the license stage. Their problems are different, their issues are different, and then to be able to have the same technology grow with you when you are now a full-fledged operation with 2 or 3 locations, and then to also be the same technology that you're going to grow with when you are in 15 states, right? That's a huge challenge, but it's a requirement of this industry if you're going to be a successful piece in helping this industry grow, is to be able to not only build things the way they should be, but work with your customers along their entire journey.
And it's such an opportunity, I think, when you have this clean slate to begin with. You can look at other industries, you can look at things that they were doing right, or maybe they weren't doing right or could improve on, and you can make those changes now while we're still at like you said, this base zero. So now is really that time to grasp these systems, put things in place. And then on the flip side of that too, I think we're just at such a an interesting point in time, because now, unlike any other industry that's out there right now, we have the benefit of AI technology that's evolving so rapidly. We have machine learning that is evolving so rapidly, and we have all of these things coming together along with all of these advanced testing solutions and different things that are coming out. There's so much opportunity for the data that we're collecting from these various places to just really kind of set the bar, I think, for the cannabis industry to do things right.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. In fact, when I was talking about how we can redefine supply chain with all the tried and true pieces that come into supply chain, but the insertion of feedback, point of impact feedback, right? If a customer is buying Blue Dream and they prefer organic Blue Dream, taking the data, taking how they consume it, whether it's a joint or whether it's flower, taking that data and being able to feed it real time to a cultivator who is on MainStem's platform and looking to procure nutrients or looking to procure packaging, we can provide point of impact decision making data in that supply chain to say, there's a great demand for Blue Dream in an organic manner. I can make my decisions right now, not just on what I think and not just what the supply chain is available. Now we're introducing things on the demand side of what consumers really like. And I think this is going to be extremely powerful, from bringing in data, not just about the customer and the customer understanding themselves. It's bringing in all the data from the supply side, and then also bringing in the data from the end consumer side at the different point of impact decision process in the supply chain. That is extremely powerful.
Definitely, definitely. Well, we've always said that data is king, and clearly, as the cannabis industry is evolving, we're learning just how true that statement really is, and so it's going to be interesting, I think, as we start to collect all of this data and see the results that come from this. I think our eyes are just going to be very, very open to the cannabis industry and to consumers and all of that, but. Looking ahead, what do you see now, I think, for the future here for the cannabis industry, as in particular with the supply chain? I mean, is this going to get worse before it gets better? What do we have to look forward to?
Right. My initial thoughts around the future before this entire supply chain issue happened was data was going to be king and data was going to be a powerful tool. I still think that's the case. Supply chain, first, the issue is we're still a ways from getting it back on track. I think we're going to see the problematic issues that we have through the rest of this year. But I think in 2023, we're going to see some really innovative things. What I mean by that is the cannabis industry is still young enough that the infrastructure of distribution and manufacturing is relatively small in terms of different layers. And what I mean by that is there's a very small handful of people who make vape cartridges, good quality ones. So there's a very even smaller handful of people who make pre-roll cones. But those small handful of suppliers provide almost all the services for the majority of the distributors out there and the customers out there. Well, when you have a bottleneck in that piece of it that's caused by something like this supply chain issue from the pandemic that we're experiencing, that causes innovation, right? That causes change. And so I think not this year, maybe some steps towards that will happen this year, but probably next year, we're gonna see a couple of things. We're going to see new emergence of alternative suppliers for those products that are going to provide diversity. And what that's also going to drive is innovation in those products, right? Because now you've got a little bit of competitive nature because we're going to have more of a supply base, right? The demand is so high, it's just going to emerge as more suppliers, and then they're going to have to compete by creating new innovative products to compete with. So that's my prediction. Is I think we're going to see more diversity on the supply side, and we're also going to see some really neat, new, innovative ways to package and consume cannabis come 2023.
Yeah, I agree. I think the packaging is going to be a really interesting area that we see evolve here over the next couple of years. Do you feel like the pinch that supply chain is creating on us right now may invigorate some American manufacturing and maybe bring some of these solutions back to domestic production?
Yes, there's good indicators. Things that have really good value that are important to the cannabis industry, I think have a great opportunity for being manufactured here. What I mean by that is things are like biodegradable plastics, right? Things that are very eco-friendly that take a lot of R&D. I think those have great opportunities to be manufactured and designed here. Maybe longer term, they'll have some competitive pieces that come with overseas. I also think that in general, manufacturing domestically has seen this shift when it comes to agriculture. The last few years when I've gone to MJ BizCon, it's been very delightful to see, walking down the aisles, seeing new innovative technologies that help with yield enhancements, right? Getting more yield, building better crops. Those things aren't as prevalent in traditional ag on the smaller scale, right? That because cannabis in general is still a smaller scale compared to general ag. But to see that cannabis as the shiny object now is fueling these technologies that can be used at a larger scale for agriculture and in cannabis is very exciting. And when I talk to these folks, a lot of those companies are based out of the US. So that's actually very cool.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, hopefully the future does get a little bit brighter in terms of supply chain and we start to see these things shift a little bit here over the next few years, as we continue to recover from pandemic and as we continue to recover from all of these blows that it feels like the industry has taken over the last couple of years. But thanks so much for coming on the show and talking to us about the supply chain and about the solutions that MainStem offers for cannabis providers. Do you want to talk to our audience a little bit about how they can find MainStem or communicate with you, and how do they get in touch?
Sure. You can come to our website at mainstem.io, mainstem.io, or you can email me directly at alen, alen, at mainstem.io.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, and maybe we'll have you back on in a few months and we'll have some good news to report about supply chain.
Would love to do that. Thanks for having me on, Christine.